welcome to the next episode of the Vox Juris Podcast. My name is Gellert, and the goal of this podcast is to educate law students about legal career opportunities through the insights and stories of professionals. And now, let me introduce my guest for today's episode. Dr. William Thomas Wörster is an accomplished scholar in public international law with nearly 2 decades of experience in teaching at the International and European Law program at the Hague University of Applied Sciences. He earned his PhD in public international law from the University of Amsterdam, an LLM in public international law from Leiden University, a JD from Chicago-Kent College of Law, and a BA in modern European history from the University of Kansas. Throughout his career, Dr. Wörster has worked in a wide range of legal environments, including academia, private practice, NGOs, government institutions, and the United Nations. He served as a law clerk at the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, contributing to the appeal judgment in Prosecutor versus Nazar Oric, and previously worked as an attorney in Chicago, specializing in immigration and diplomatic visa matters. At THUAS, he teaches an extensive portfolio of courses such as public international law, international criminal law, and the law of international organizations, to just name a few. His current research focuses on the theory and sources of public international law. Dr. Wörster, welcome to the Vox Juris Podcast. I am honored to have you join me today.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
My first question to you is the following. What motivated you to study law and eventually to become a lecturer?
It's a big question, and I wish I had a really easy answer where I could say, I just wanted to make money, or I wanted to be a famous lawyer, or something like this. I wish there was an easy answer. I think it was just interesting to me. I think it was just a fascinating area of work for me. So in the United States, of course, we don't study law at the undergraduate level. So I studied modern European history, which I loved. I thought it was so fascinating about trying to identify, what were the operative things that happened in history that really made a difference, and which were the minor things that didn't make a difference. It was so complex and so fascinating to me. And when it came time for me to do graduate study and to continue my career, I saw law as basically the study of philosophy. But at the end of the day, you had to come to a decision. You couldn't just put off the discussion for tomorrow to keep arguing about it. And for me, that was deeply interesting and deeply fascinating. And it was a big bonus, of course, that there's actually a career attached to it, and it's attractive that you can do a professional training, and that there's obviously a direction where you can go and become a lawyer. That was also very attractive. I can understand that. But I think fundamentally, it whatever you study, it has to be something that is deeply interesting to you. If you have any idea that you want to maintain a career in something. So that was basically my fundamental interest.
I understand. Thank you for sharing that. And next up, thinking back about your student years, how did you approach studying for exams, and what methods worked best for you?
Well, the study for exams, it depends on what the exam is for. So, is it an exam where you're expected to memorize something? So, for example, an American bar exam, right? You just have to memorize massive amounts of laws and then apply them as fast as you can, as accurately as you can, watching the clock, and just survive it. That's very different from a lot of law school exams, which are more about how do you articulate very specifically the way the law is or does not apply in a particular scenario. So there's a lot of distinguishing cases, a lot of arguing cases, a lot of approaching facts in different ways and trying to find those gray areas in law where you can articulate an argument. And if that's the point of your exams, then you need to prepare for that. If the point of the exam is something else, you need to prepare for that. So most of the law school exams what I prepared for were really more of the second type. And the way that I would go about doing that is developing an outline. So starting from the very beginning of the class and then just going through my notes. And I do think it's really important that I took handwritten notes of everything. No laptops, I think that's a really key thing. Went through my handwritten notes and structured an entire outline that sort of conceived of the entire field as if I was, say, writing a textbook. And then I would prepare this outline that was sometimes 15, 20 pages for a particular course that I just taken. And then the next step is to start brainstorming what a case would look like. And in the States, this is, of course, long ago before ChatGPT, in the States, there were often these prepared sample questions, and then you could work through them and using your outline, apply that and try to find those arguments. And if I was a student today, I would just put it in ChatGPT and say, give me some cases that I can practice an exam with. And then as you practice them, you get used to that application and argumentation. So that's really the way you do it. When it's a kind of exam that's a memorization exam, that's really just a matter of how much can you cram into your head. And that's memorization techniques, A, B, C, D, this applies to this, Can I think of so a device where I have a little song that has the first letter for each thing and it's aligned with something, all those little tricks, which you can easily Google online and find the answers for. But you really have to be very clear about what are you trying to get out of this. Because many times I've seen students reread the textbook or go back and watch the videos from the lectures or something like that as a way of preparing. And in my view, that's probably the worst way that you can study. I think that the far more important is that you come to every class and you take handwritten notes and that you later digest them into a written document on your computer, and not that you go back and rewatch videos, because then you're, I think, preparing for the wrong thing. You're preparing for memorizing what the teacher has said rather than preparing for an exam. But that was my experience of how I did it, and that's how I would advise students. And if I could, it is an important thing in engaging different senses, but it's also when you're writing handwritten notes and you can't just take dictation really fast on your laptop. You're thinking about what's being said at the same time, and you're thinking about how do I write this down in an efficient way. So you're making bullet points and you're summarizing what's been said really quickly so that you can get through all the stuff. And so it engages not only your different senses, but also engages your mind. And this has been fairly conclusively demonstrated, I think, scientifically, in most studies on research, on studying techniques, that this is the most effective way.
And next up, having taught many students over the years, what common struggle or pattern have you noticed in how students learn law, and how do you think they could overcome that?
A lot of students really struggle with trying to figure out what the study of law even is. If you watch a Hollywood movie and some famous lawyer comes in this movie and they say, what do you think about this case, Mr. So-and-so? And then the lawyer says, well, under section 2, paragraph subsection 3, that this is they just spout this kind of stuff out. And this is a completely fictional vision of what a lawyer even is. That person will probably be the worst lawyer ever if that's what the way they approach everything. A better lawyer is looking for the gray area in everything. You're looking for the gaps. You're not spouting off the memorized regulations of this or that or whatever. Most lawyers haven't memorized that much stuff to begin with. We usually have to research something before we can spout something off. But it's the application and the argument and trying to craft a sort of narrative of how do these facts in this situation with this context either work or don't work for or against my client. And so knowing where the gaps are in the law are so important. So I've noticed that in many of my courses, especially the more advanced like year 3 courses, I often get the feedback from students where they say something like, Worcester doesn't give us any of the answers, and that this is somehow a complaint about the quality of my course, which I always found pretty delightful, because in a sense that's exactly the whole point, which is find those areas where there are debates, where there are arguments, where there are contested viewpoints, where the law is maybe not completely crystal clear, and then explore that area. What is the values behind this? What is the structure of the law? What are they trying to achieve? What was the legislator attempting to achieve? And then you find the space for making different arguments and for characterizing facts one way or another. And in my view, that's where the lawyer's value is really, really strong. The point is, where do we need to get students and how do we view your job? So if I think about, a student now, especially now with things like ChatGPT, who's going to go out and have a career, how are they going to have a career? How are they going to add value to any kind of situation? It's not going to be because they've memorized lots of things that anybody can just find on the internet, right? That's not the value. The value isn't that they memorize the UN Charter or whatever and they know all the different rules, right? The value is being able to say, how can I not only articulate the rules, but find those little areas in the law to clarify them? How can I find the facts and characterize the facts in one way or a different way, and then create an entire legal argument that either works for or against your client? That's where the value really, really is.
From your perspective as a lecturer, what advice would you give to those law students who would like to bring the most out of their university years academically?
Right. So I think there's a lot of temptation, understandably so, for students to focus on the first job that they will get when they leave university. And I understand why that is. You're here, you don't know what the future holds for you. It's an expensive education, so you may have to, justify it to your family why you're spending all this time and money. There are a number of reasons why there's a focus on that. I get that. And that transition from student to a career to an employed person is a difficult one. Some students are very smooth, but most students struggle with it. But the thing is, if that is completely where your focus is, then you'll get that job, and that will be the job you have for the rest of your career, because you put everything into getting that particular position, and you've trained yourself to think about that. I think it's really important to think about yourself having a career of 10, 20, 30 years in this profession, and accept from the beginning that you will move from job to job to job. I never thought in a million years I would be a law lecturer. That wasn't part of any plan, and yet here I am. And I'm so thankful that in my legal training and my background, I did things that helped me to have this position, rather than only doing things that helped me have that very first job. So my advice to students is to study something that you are super interested in. Just pick whatever is the most interesting thing, because that will give you energy for your career. And then seek out people, connections, contacts, work experiences, those type of things that are going to prepare you to have a very flexible career. So I know it sounds funny, but you just have to do what you love. You have to do what you love and not worry so much about that first job. And in fact, funny enough, sometimes students that have the hardest time finding that first job sometimes have the most satisfying career at the end, which is a sort of nonsensical kind of approach. But I think it's diversifying those experiences, doing what you love, and the career will follow. You just have to trust that the money will be there and the income will be there and the career will be there, because it will be there as long as you bring the passion and the interest to this. So go for a bunch of internships, do things over the summer, don't just lie on the beach, read things, study things, talk to people, go to events here in The Hague, et cetera, et cetera. Just follow things that look interesting to you, and the career and the rest will come.
I see. And during your student years, how clear was it for you which area of law or laws you wanted to specialize in?
It was clear from the very beginning. I went to law school already knowing that international law was interesting to me. In fact, when I was an undergraduate and I was speaking to one of the school counselors about the next step, whether I should go do a JD study or something else, and I said to this person, I'm interested in going to law school, to which he responded, so you want to be a lawyer? And I said, I'm not sure if I want to be a lawyer. And he pushed back on this. He said, no one goes to law school who doesn't want to be a lawyer. And I thought, well, maybe. I don't know if that's what I want, but I know what I'm interested in. I know what's fascinating to me. And what I found fascinating about international law is it was all of the questions about how the world worked exaggerated. It wasn't just issues of contracts and how we make deals, but it's international stuff with all of the complexity that's there, right? It wasn't just how do we enforce obligations. It was how do we do it internationally. Everything becomes much more dramatic and much more challenging, in some ways kind of chaotic. And I thought that was such a fascinating question. And I was interested in it, and I wanted to study, and I wasn't too worried about whether I would be a lawyer. I ended up becoming a lawyer, but I wasn't too worried about whether I would become a lawyer or not. I just went with what was particularly interesting to me. So I knew from the very beginning what I wanted to do.
International law is a highly competitive field, and students may feel discouraged by its competitiveness when looking for careers. What would you say to those students?
Well, let's not shy away from it. It is competitive. It's definitely very competitive. I don't think we should have any illusions about that. It's not something that's easy to fall into. That being said, and that means you have to study hard and work hard. Please, let's not forget this, right? That's actually really critical. But careers in international law take a lot of different forms. So if what you're saying is, I want to be a judge on the International Court of Justice, I'm afraid that job only goes to about a dozen people at the very highest levels. It will not go to me. It will not go to most of the people that I know. It's not really on offer. And that's fine. That's completely fine, right? If you say to me, I have to be Secretary General of the UN, well, good luck. I wish you all the best in the world. But the reality is you could be the perfect person and just have the wrong nationality, So at some of these levels and some of these kinds of positions, it is brutally, brutally competitive, so much so that it should be discouraging for you. But that being said, there's a lot of positions that exist in other places. And what you need to think about is, what do I want to do? What's the kind of environment I want to be in? Who are the people I want to spend my days with? You'll spend more days with your colleagues, and in my case, students, than I do sometimes with my own wife, Who do I want to spend my time with? Where do I want to be working? What kind of questions do I want to be dealing with? That might lead you to working in the tax authority of your country in a small sub-department that you never even heard of that deals with international rebate, something or other. Who knows what they're doing. But you have a great team. You have a decent enough salary. You're dealing with interesting questions all day. And you see career progression as the issues get more and more complex. And that can be deeply satisfying. So competitive for sure, definitely competitive. I don't want to avoid that question. Of course, it's really competitive, but that doesn't mean that there's only 5 people that get hired in the whole world to do all of international law. International law is everywhere, and so it just depends on what you're happy with and who do you want to work with and what do you want to be doing with your days.
I see. Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Verster. And now, next up. You were part of the core team that built the international and European law program from the ground up. Could you tell us the story of how this law program at THUAS was first created, and how did the idea for this degree initially come up?
So for the longest time, the Universities of Applied Sciences didn't offer law in the Netherlands, and that was changed several years, right around the time when I first moved to the Netherlands and I was doing other things. Around that time, the Hague University of Applied Sciences got a license to offer law, and that license covered the right to offer it as a full-time program and as a part-time program. And the choice was made, I wasn't here then, but the choice was made to offer the Dutch law in that part-time slot, which meant that they had a license to teach a full-time law program just sort of lying around that wasn't really being used. And so that just sort of existed, and it was just sort of dormant. And at the time, there were a number of real visionary leaders, including Ernst van Bemmelen, who was really the sort of grandfather of the whole initiative and project. And through just Hague connections and knowing people who know people, and a professor that I was friends with, and blah, 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 we formed a whole series of connections amongst us. And the idea was to take advantage of that license for a full-time program, but to do it different, and to try something different, try something that no one has ever done in this country before. And if it was going to work anywhere, it would work in The Hague. So we decided to start a law program that did not offer any domestic law at all, no Dutch law. And I venture to say it was not only unique in the Netherlands, but probably unique in the world. I can't even think of any law school that doesn't offer domestic law as a mandatory part of its curriculum. But again, the idea was, if it's going to work, it'll work here. And so building the law program based on the Dutch national profile, but tweaking everything for its international or its European law or its comparative law version. And then it was just a matter of sitting down and figuring out what are the courses that we're going to offer and hoping that students would show up. And the first contingent of students, I think, was about 40 students. And that was a huge relief. And then the next contingent was, I think, 80 students. And then it just doubled from then on out until we got to the current number of students. And it was just a fantastic success. And of course, you don't know in the first few years whether students are going to keep showing up or not, but they keep doing it, which shows the great attraction of The Hague and the particular unique nature of the program. And I feel so fortunate that I was in the right place at the right time, and I met the right people, and we tried the right thing that just happened to work. And I feel so fortunate that I've had the colleagues that I've had and the students that have shown the bravery to come sometimes halfway around the world to try something that was a bit of an experiment, but has now proved to really be a durable and important part of the legal landscape.
Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Wörster. When you were designing the curriculum, what was the original vision or goal for the International and European Law program, and what did you hope students would gain from it?
Well, the vision was, like I was saying before, it was that we wanted to offer a core legal education that hit the main topics in a traditional legal education, but to put a international European comparative spin on that. So I give you an example. Every law school that you go to in the world, you go to Malaysia or Argentina or Mexico or wherever you go, you'll study contract law, and you'll study Mexican contract law, right, or Malaysian contract law. And so we have to offer contract law. We have to if we want to have a responsible legal education. So how do we do that? Well, we could do that from, say, a comparative perspective and line up common law and civil law, comparative contract principles, or international contracting principles, that kind of thing. So put that spin on it. And then students, in our vision, would end up being far more flexible professionals, not just versed in the narrow structure of Mexican contract law, but in how does contract law, how do we conceive of contract law and all the goals and principles and rules within contract law, and how that manifests in different legal systems, meaning that you can look at this legal system or this legal system or the other legal system, and they will all make a kind of sense because you can see how the different rules are all manifesting there. So that was the kind of idea, to create this flexible legal professional, someone who was already highly professionally competent, and importantly, already highly professionally competent at a bachelor level, because going back to the competitiveness of the international field, already very competitive at a bachelor level, which would then facilitate them immediately going into the work field or going on to further education. And that was kind of really I think the core idea of doing that. And I would add that there was additionally a recognition by myself and by others that law is an emancipatory education. And it really gives students, and this goes back to our discussion about a clear career progression into the field. It gives people a professional training in a specific field that makes them capable of going straight into employment if they want. And that's absolutely fantastic for students. Absolutely fantastic, because then you have that security of knowing that you have an expertise rather than, say, just a vague generalized education background. You have an expertise in a particular field that you know. And then when you go into the field, you already are employable with a decent enough salary where you know you can support yourself for the rest of your life. So it frees you actually from a lot of those other considerations. But that's kind of the vision for what we were thinking about.
And looking back at all these years of teaching and program development, is there anything you are especially proud of in the way the program turned out?
I'm so proud of how ambitious we were. You know, it would have been so easy to just copy things that other people had done before. There are lots of law schools in the Netherlands, tons of them, of extremely excellent quality internationally. And many of them run bachelor level programs. And those bachelor level programs tend to be law and something. And the reason is, in my view, they're not bold enough. They're not bold enough, they're not brave enough to really just teach international and European law as such, right? They have to have something else to make sure that the students feel the value, or that they can ensure that they have some kind of employability or some kind of a profession. So I think that a lot of other schools have been a little bit too timid in their approach to this. And I'm really happy that we came out and said, let's just go for it. And let's see if students will show up. And then let's do everything in our power to get those students and make them employable, and to show that they can have successes. And the most amazing thing is the students that join us are some of the most ambitious people that you will meet. They come here, and then within weeks they're looking at all the different options and what can I do, and can I do this, and I want to do this internship, and I want to achieve this, and then they go on to be hugely successful. So, and when we did all that, we didn't just set our sights on a sort of very modest, very humble approach to our place in the legal sphere, and to the employment that student options that students would have, but to basically tell students, you can do whatever you want. You can do whatever you want with this. We will support you. And the students every day impress us with the kinds of things that they go on to do. And now, years and years later, some of those very first students that came to join us, I see reports. I see them arguing in front of the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea. I see them giving testimony at the European Parliament. I see them as partners at major law firms. This is a huge success, and I'm so happy that we said, let's be ambitious. And then the most ambitious students came to us, and we are successful together.
Dr. Verster, thank you for sharing these early experiences. And now I would like to shift the focus to your professional roles as a lecturer, law clerk, and associate attorney. First, what does your day-to-day work look like as a lecturer at THUAS?
It's highly unstructured. Aside from, say, having to appear for a lecture, or maybe a meeting with the rest of my colleagues to discuss some curricular issues, it's very unstructured. And I think in order to do the job, you need to have a deep sense of your own professional organization and your own ability to prioritize tasks and to get things done on time. There's very little checking on you about deadlines or anything like that, which is one of the things I love about it. I love the high level of autonomy and the level of responsibility that I can feel. The other thing is, it does demand that you are constantly developing your expertise, which means you have to devote, really for me on a daily basis, the continual self-development. So if I can give you a snapshot of a day, I read every day, every single day, for at least an hour. And that's current events, but that's new blogs, that's a new article that came out, that's whatever you have to, or a new case that came out. So constantly refreshing my knowledge of what's going on the most cutting edge issues. And then I try to write every day as well for at least an hour to try to produce whatever scholarship that I'm working on, and maintaining a kind of pipeline of various projects that I'm working on. So I do a little bit of that. I tend to be a very early riser, so I do all this before anybody else is even awake and at work. And then the rest of the day every day is a little bit different. This day I have to teach a seminar, but that's not until the afternoon, and so I'm going to do a bunch of tasks to prepare something that I'm teaching at a different point, or I'm working on a different project for a curriculum or something else. So it's very much sort of fragmented like that, and I think you have to you keep constantly in your mind this kind of knowledge of the different moving parts and what's happening, and make sure that you're on top of everything. And then there are, of course, there are all the random emails from students about, why is my grade from 2 weeks ago missing, and the blah blah blah, and these little things that you have to run around and fix. But it's a remarkably rewarding career, and I very much love the fact that it gives me a huge amount of space to develop my expertise, and to do that in a way where I can really feel professionally autonomous and self-responsible for realizing the results of the education.
I see. And expanding on this topic, what is something about being a lecturer that students may not see but you wish they understood?
Sometimes it's difficult. I can even remember when I was a student myself, and I would see the teachers come in, and they seem to just magically appear out of nowhere because they couldn't be found any other time. And then they would magically appear in class, and they would do this lecture just off the cuff. They're just making it up, based on their brilliance. And then they would sort of scurry away and completely disappear, and you could never find them again. And I just wondered, what do they do all day? What could they possibly be filling their time with? And of course, the reality is that our time is intensely full of all kinds of activities. And that little class performance of an hour and a half or whatever that you see is something that we spent weeks, months preparing. We maybe even prepared it last semester over 3 or 4 hours maybe of reading and compiling and that type of thing. So there's a whole lot of this, work that goes on behind the scenes, I think, that's often difficult. And the other thing is that we have a very high degree of self-governance within our positions. So when I worked as a law clerk, or when I worked in a law firm, a lot of my work was very much governed by my boss. Do these things, take care of this. And I don't really have a lot of that. I serve on different committees, and I have different groups, and I have different bodies, but oftentimes we're very decentralized, and we're taking decisions on our own, or we're developing policies, or we're consulting with others. So there's a lot of scurrying around behind the scenes, making sure that the law program just continues to function and that we're always pushing the quality higher and higher. So that there is a lot that goes on, but I don't think a lot of it's visible.
I see. And Dr. Wörster, what do you find the most rewarding about teaching law students?
The most rewarding, I came to law because I believed in the rule of law. Maybe that sounds kind of cheesy and romantic, but I do. I believe in that. And, I look around the world today, and the world seems to be completely collapsing all around us. And I feel a deep responsibility to help ensure that is maintained in some way. When I first started law school, my teachers gave me a gift, and the gift was the tradition of law. It was how to think about law, how to think about rules, and think about how we govern ourselves, and how to think about how we behave as professionals. And there was so much about that was something that has developed over centuries. And I slowly realized that this was more than me just paying my university fees and going to class and taking exams, but that I was becoming part of a profession, and the profession's job was the maintenance of the very notion of rule of law at its core. And I recognized that was a tremendous gift that my teachers had given to me. And there was no way to, aside from my university fees, there was no way to really pay them back for that gift. And the way I pay it back now is with my own students, is to say, I got this gift, I inherited this tradition, and it's incumbent on me to make sure I can transfer this tradition onwards. So when students, again, sometimes in feedback, students might complain that I make them read too much or work too hard or my exams are too difficult or whatever. And I take that on board. Don't think that I don't. I do take that on board. But I make those choices to make my courses, even my year one course, as hard as it is, it's done out of love. It's done out of affection. It's done out of consideration for the students, because I want to make sure that not only are they performing at a very high level, because again, the competitiveness of the field, but I also have an obligation to them to make sure that they inherit the tradition that I've inherited. And then when I leave this earth, that they maintain the rule of law that we've spent centuries building. And again, we look around, we see threats to the rule of law all the time. It is all the more important that people study law and that they go out into the world to fix it in whatever small way that they can, helping someone with a horrible divorce situation that they're trying to deal with in child custody or whatever, and helping this family to heal and to move forward, right? Whatever little things that we can do. That participation and that maintenance of this tradition of the rule of law is absolutely critical, and for me is the most important value that really motivates me in doing my job and all the choices that I make to do that.
I understand, Dr. Wörster. Thank you for sharing that. And now, let's move to your roles as a law clerk and as an attorney. What did your day-to-day work look like as a law clerk at the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia?
This was a very rewarding job and a very intense job and a very exhausting position. I loved it. I really loved it. But it took a lot out of me. It took so much out of me. You have multiple cases going on at the same time. And so while I was in one particular team, I was being lent out all the time for all sorts of different things. So there were all kinds of things happening. But I spent the majority of my days, and sometimes just whole weeks, just drafting, just writing. So I worked in chambers. The different jobs are very different, right? Prosecution and defense. And I worked in chambers, which meant I worked for the judges. And of course, the judges take the ultimate decisions on everything. And the job of law clerks is to prepare all those things and to sort of make recommendations and to digest particular facts and make proposals and then give different alternatives to the judges. This is one way of looking at it, another way of looking at it. And invariably the judges would say, you got it all wrong, and they would just cross everything off and you have to go back and do the whole thing all over again. But you would spend weeks and weeks and weeks just constantly drafting and writing. What's the issue? What are the facts? What's the application? Just over and over in a very intense way. And on top of that, the material was very disturbing because it was dealing with war crimes. And so you had access and you saw video, photographs, written testimony, people who were had written things in letters and diaries, but also videos, interviews, and everything that was just absolutely horrible, just horrific stuff. And you have to be professional about the whole thing and just do your job as best you can. So it was a incredibly meaningful position, and I'm so glad that I did it. I don't know whether I could have made that a career for myself. I'm so proud of other people and just amazed at other people who can do that. But it was an incredibly exhausting and rewarding experience, and I think I'm all the better for it.
Now, further expanding on this topic, was there anything that surprised you by working at an international criminal tribunal?
The surprise, I suppose, was you see the tribunal, you see the face of the front of the building, you can see it on the news. Or if you go on the Wikipedia page, you'll see the photograph of it. And people will talk about it. And they'll talk about it in these terms of reverence sometimes, or these romantic ideas, or this kind of almost celebrity status. And it's played up quite a lot, news cameras out in the front, people interviewing on the lawn in front. And there's a side of it in which you can get completely wrapped up in the notoriety and the sort of celebrity of the whole event. And where, you're walking to work every day and around your neck you have the lanyard and you have your UN ID and your badge that you swipe in with. And if you start buying into all of the celebrity, you start thinking that, well, I'm really hot stuff. Oh, look at me. I'm with the UN. Look at me. If you start buying into the celebrity of the whole thing, then you stop taking your job very seriously. And of course, there's always going to be a few people there that are like that. But ultimately, I think you have to have some sense of your own humility and your own part in the whole role, and treat it as a job, and treat it as a job to be taken seriously. And so you walk in the front door, and there's this gigantic UN logo, but you need to focus on what are things I need to write today. Who do I need to talk to today? What are my deadlines? You need to do those kinds of things because those are the people that win their cases. And those are the people that get war crimes prosecutions settled, right? Those are the people who put their heads down and really get it done. And if you buy into all the other stuff, it's just hugely a distraction. So the thing that surprised me about that is that how tempting it is to buy into all the celebrity and how some people might do that. Yeah. But also how it can just be a normal job and how you can treat it as a normal job. And I think you should treat it as a normal job.
I see. So staying grounded should be at the core of our approach as legal professionals.
Yeah, always.
And for law students who plan on working in the field of international criminal law, what concrete steps should they take while still in university?
It's sometimes quite difficult, I think, as a student, to put yourself in the place of a recruiter or a person in charge of hiring, because you as a student you haven't probably done that. So you sit on one side and you think, how should I make my CV? How do I write my letter? How do I present myself? And whenever I see students' CVs or draft motivation letters, I'm always struck by how much they talk about me. This job will be good for me. This will help me advance my career. And what's difficult about that is that, of course, the recruiter does not care about you. They care about the job and whether or not you can do that and whether you can do something for them. It's a mindset that's really difficult for students to really get into their head. So if you think about it from the perspective of the recruiter or the hiring person, what do they want? They're going to get 150 applications for the one job. What are they going to look for? What do they want to see? Okay, they want to see grades, they want to see you took some courses and that type of thing. And I would say, if I opened up a CV and I saw a student who every single summer had done an internship at a different place, even in a very humble place, a small clinical law firm or something, or, criminal practice or something like that, nothing flashy. They started there. And then they went up the next step to something more, and then the next step to something more, and the next step to something more. Someone who was constantly driven, right, to go to the next thing, to go to the next thing. That's the kind of person I think that a recruiter will look at and say, here's someone that's going somewhere. Here's someone that really stands out from the other people. And that's, I think, in those cases, relatively easy to say all those other 149 applications I can put to the side because this is the person that I'm looking for. So I would say for students, you think about, and you don't have to be perfect, say, I know exactly where I'm going to be, I'm going to do these steps. But just get busy doing the work. Internships, volunteer. It can be a couple hours a week, and then you, over the summer, do something else, whatever. Just show that level of activity and that excitement and that enthusiasm, and then constantly building on that and building on. That's the kind of thing I think that's quite impressive. And then they can immediately see that you're someone who's valuable, that they want on their team.
And next up, what did your day-to-day work look like as an attorney at AE Gustafsson PC?
So this was a law firm. It was what we call a boutique law firm, which means it's a very small law firm but with a very focused practice that concentrated on international trade issues primarily between the United States and Northern Europe, mostly Swedish, as you can tell from the name. I had the portfolio that I did most of the immigration work, as well as I worked for a small cluster of clients that were my partner's clients. So the work was huge waves of work, just wave after wave after wave of stuff coming in. And there was a lot of drafting and a lot of talking to clients and making emails and all the rest of that. But the real most important element and the challenge for the job was to always be aware of time and the schedule and the deadlines and what was coming. Students will sometimes say to me, I have an assignment that's due in 2 weeks or something like that. And I think to myself, wow, when I was a lawyer, if I had a deadline 2 weeks away, that would feel so luxurious that I could just relax. Because oftentimes in legal practice, depending on what you're working on at the one time, you could have deadlines every day, or every other day, especially if you're on a big team where you're working on multiple things. So every day was really coming into the office and figuring out sort of what's on the agenda and making brutal choices, making really strict choices. What am I going to do with my time today? Which cases am I going to prioritize? Which ones are urgent? Which ones can wait a week? Which ones do I just need one piece of information? I can already take that off of my plate. It was, I always used to explain it with the word triage. And triage is what they do in an emergency room at a hospital, where they have all these patients coming in and someone has a small scratch that a dog gave them, right? and somebody else has maybe a limb hanging off that's about to fall, and somebody else is having a heart attack. And what the professionals have to do is they have to figure out who needs what in what order. Do I deal with this or do I deal with that? Or do I just go to that one person, do one little thing for them and then run to somebody else for the bigger intervention? And you have to have a sense of consequences. You have to have a sense of how long will this task take me, that type of thing. And so what I became is I just became super, super brutal with my time and really, really strict with my time. And I would say, come in and look at all the cases and say, I'm going to do this, this, and this, but I'm only going to work on this, and I'm only going to work, and make that choice in the morning. These are the things I'm going to do. And then you just do them. And it didn't matter if it was 5, 6, 7, 8 p.m., because those are the things that had to happen that day. And as a professional, you're expected to deliver all those things. So it was having that kind of self-discipline and that sort of awareness of the consequences and how long it would take me to do certain tasks. And then always maintaining control of all that waves and waves of work to make sure you didn't miss anything. Because if you miss it, it's catastrophic.
Dr. Wörster, thank you for sharing your insights into your professional work. I would now like to conclude our conversation and finish with a final few questions. In your experience, how does working across different legal systems add to your skills, and do you think that this gives you an advantage in your legal practice?
I think that working in different legal traditions, right, in different countries, helps you to think through more what are the fundamental functions of all these different aspects of the law. So, you move from system to system and they will use different words and they will frame things in different ways, right? In the US we have torts, and in Europe you have non-contractual obligations, right? And it can, at first glance, sound like everything's just foreign and this is impossible. But the reality is we see some of the exact same functions and the same concepts from place to place and different words for them. So I remember I spent a summer working for a small firm in London while I was still in law school. And so here I am, and my job there was to write the legal aid applications, where you have to make the sort of initial prima facie case, and then it goes off to legal aid to see whether you get funding for it. It was a very sort of low-level task, because I was a very low-level person. But I still had to sort of make the case in all these applications. So I would draft up something and I give it to one of the partners. And invariably they would come back and they would say, you're phrasing things wrong. And of course I had to learn all the British spellings and all those other kind of minor kinds of things. But you're not phrasing this, or you're not articulating this the right way, and everything else. But ultimately it's still the same function. You're still making an argument for a case. Right? You're still talking about the law and how to interpret the law. You're talking about the facts and how the facts fit a particular situation. And no lawyer is going to have memorized all the laws in their country anyway, so whether you know the laws in this country or you don't know the laws in a different country, it doesn't really matter. That's why you have other professionals that you work with. So I think it's getting out of the sort of provincial idea that that your particular legal system is so unique and completely unknowable by anybody else, and realizing that we're all kind of doing some of the same kinds of functions. And this goes back to your question about setting up the law program here and why we thought it would even work. So I think, and why we're doing it for the students, and we think it's a value for the students. So I do think it makes you a much more flexible professional.
Dr. Wörster, if you could go back in time and give your younger self one piece of advice at the start of your legal studies, what would it be?
I suppose it would be, don't worry about it. I was a student just like all the rest of you, and I was doing things that were interesting to me, and I had some idea of what I kind of wanted to do, and I made all kinds of choices about different jobs, and not necessarily having a perfect plan. I didn't make my choices, for example, for this current position. It's not like, when I'm 20-something years old that I said I want to be a lecturer at the Hague University. I didn't even know this existed, right? So I was thinking about, what would be the next good move, and how do I get from here to there? And I had this kind of idea that was very vague, that I wanted to work in sort of international somehow, but that I needed to go maybe halfway to that and compromise and try something different. And it ended up just being a complete trial and error. Try this, and if it doesn't work, that's fine, and try something different, and also that will be fine. And I have never really had any big struggles with my career. And I'm not any super amazing best lawyer in the world or anything like that. I'm just a normal person. And I've had, I think, quite a lot of success, but it's not because I've had some master plan that was laid out perfectly for me or anything like that. I was open to experiment with different things and try different things. And I think fundamentally, worrying about it and stressing about it would have just been a lot of spent energy rather than just doing the work and getting recognized for it. So I suspect that my advice back then would be to sort of, have faith in yourself that it will work out.
I see. My second to last question is as follows. Have you ever had a mentor or mentors who impacted your career?
I've had many mentors. Never anybody that was sort of formally designated as such, but I don't think that's really what your question is, right? I've had many people that I've come to rely on for advice, and I think it's important to do that. And I think at first, it always felt for me, it was very awkward and kind of embarrassing to go to people and ask them for their advice. And I think you just need to get over that, and you need to always be looking for advice and for feedback. It can be remarkably useful. My PhD supervisors are amazing people, and I chose them because they're both brilliant leaders in their field. And I recognized very early on that not only could they advise me about the intellectual side and the process of preparing a PhD, but that I could ask them about other things. And I started asking them all kinds of questions. I once had someone wrote an article that I suspected might have plagiarized me. And I went to them and I said, well, what do you advise? What do you advise me in this situation? And they had the most interesting insights. So I think, don't be shy. Ask around. Ask for advice from people. Most people are very flattered. In fact, just yesterday I had a student who reached out to me for some advice, who has actually never really been a student of mine, but just thought because of my particular background and their interest, it could be an interesting match. I'm very flattered, and I think I can't believe they come to me for advice. I wonder, I'm happy to share it. So I encourage those students, reach out to people and ask them questions, and don't be shy about it. Most people enjoy talking about themselves and enjoy giving advice, and it can be a remarkably useful source of information.
And finally, if you could give one piece of advice for all aspiring law students, what would that be?
I think that to some degree this kind of overlaps with some of the things that I've been talking about before. Students have lots of motivations for why they want to do this particular study. Sometimes it's very practical. They just, I want to make some money, or I want to have the title and sort of dignity and whatever of being a jurist. That somehow this is going to soothe my ego or that type of thing. There's all kinds of motivations for that. I think ultimately, though, you have to do what's interesting for you. You have to do what's fascinating, what you find intellectually interesting. So when students ask me, what should I focus on in my year 3, or should I take this minor, or should I not take this minor? And oftentimes the question is, I'm thinking about doing this because it will have some instrumental value for me, because I think it'll get me a job, but I'm not actually interested in it. But I think it would be smart for me to do this anyway. And I'm not sure I think that's the best strategy. I think you need to do something that you are going to build a career with. It means something that you are interested in, something that you love, something you have energy for. You don't want to have to, after 3 or 4 years of doing an incredibly boring job that you cannot stand, maybe with people you can't stand, maybe with clients you can't stand, and okay, yeah, your bank account looks nice and healthy, and you have a flashy car out in front, but you're empty inside. It has to be something that's interesting and fulfilling to you, and that every day you jump out of bed and you think, I want to read more, I want to think more about this. This just feeds me and gives me even more energy. So, if you're trying to decide what you want to study in year 3, or should I do a master's degree, or should I take this job or whatever, I say, ask yourself, is it interesting? Will you enjoy it? Will you like working with these people and working on these particular topics? And if you will, the money and the fame and the titles and all the rest of that will all come. That will all come. But you start from your own internal motivations and what's going to give you energy. And that's where I think the success is.
Dr. Verster, we have reached the end of today's episode. Thank you again for taking part in the Vox Juris podcast and for sharing your stories, your knowledge and experiences. And thank you all for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow the Vox Juris podcast on Spotify, LinkedIn and Instagram. And I will bring you more exciting guests, insights and stories in future episodes. Goodbye.